Welcome to Agile to Agility podcast with Miljan Bajic.
Major show alert!
The very first value we wrote is individuals and interactions.
Let's take this another level.
I wish all coaches would walk in the shoes of their clients before they open their mouths. I know that sounds odd, but do that and do it in both directions. So mentor someone and be mentored, coach someone and be coached. Right. I think that balance of continuous learning would, whether you're a leader, a coach, a scrum master, will really help you.
When I went to your website, I was really impressed with some of your guiding principles and everything that you have under the About page, About You page. And I was like, I don't think I've seen anything like this for a coach or for a consultant in a while. So I do want to say that I do appreciate having that on the website. But if you could summarize, maybe how would you describe or who is Bob Galen?
So who is Bob Galen? So and thank you for the kind sort of comments, Miljan, about my website. I try to be transparent, for good or bad. So one aspect of Bob Galen is and this isn't always in my best interest from a consulting point of view, but so maybe I'm overly transparent, but I really try to share, I try to be genuine. And I try to share my principles, and I try to walk. I won't write it if I'm not willing to try to walk my talk. So Bob Galen is a farm boy who was born and raised in Amish country in Pennsylvania. Was born on a farm, which led to my work ethic in Lancaster County, which is close to Philadelphia, so west of Philadelphia. I grew up on a farm, worked incredibly hard, and so there's a lot of work to do. And went into the Army when I was 18, volunteered. I did a stint of duty in the Philippines and Thailand right after Vietnam, and came back, went to school. So I used the GI Bill to go to school, to go to college. I went to college at Millersville, which is in Lancaster County, so I stayed close to home. And career-wise, development, so software development background. My first job out of school was at Sperry Univac, which did IBM 360 compatible mainframes, develop them. And so I was an assembler programmer. If you know what assembler is, I spent years. It's not very sexy, but I spent years as an assembler programmer. And just became a leader and evolved like a lot of people, went from development to leadership. Leadership really resonated with me. I think I had a knack for it, or an empathy for it, or a connection for it. A lot of people who get promoted that way don't, and they struggle with leadership. So I evolved myself into being an effective leader. I discovered Agile very early in the late 90s as Agile was becoming prevalent. I experimented as a leader with extreme programming and Scrum and Kanban very early on. And then gradually started changing my career to be more of an independent consultant. So my last full-time job as a leader, inside leader, was around 2012-13. So I've almost have total independence for the last 10 years. Really, what I'm a servant leader. The reason I write books, the reason I podcast, the reason I write so much, I always envision trying to help the community. I don't know if I do that or not, so I'm not big-headed about it. I have no idea. But my intent, the driving force for me, is maybe to give to the community. Sometimes to my detriment, because I ought to get paid for the giving, right? So I don't always get. So sometimes I give too much out, probably. But I really, I guess I feel like I lucked out. I hit the lottery in the Agile community and in the Agile space, and I feel incredibly blessed to be part of knowing you and knowing everyone in the community. And there's nothing more I can do than to give back as much as I can.
Yeah, and I think at least being part of that community, at least I appreciate what you do. And sometimes we don't necessarily show that appreciation, but a lot of times in my head, I'm saying kudos to Bob.
Oh, thank
Wow,
you.
Bob, either something that you say or somebody said, hey, I worked with Bob and he was really helpful and this is what he did for me. Like all of these things that go unnoticed, I think are sometimes lost. But I do know many people that appreciate what you do, and I do
Oh,
appreciate what
thank
you
you.
do as well.
Thank you.
Um,
I learned a long
so
time ago that you don't always hear back. So you know my
yeah.
metaphor, Milan? My metaphor is I'm throwing helpful darts out into the universe, and every once
Mhm.
in a while I'll get an acknowledgement, but you don't, and it actually motivates me. So it
Mhm.
really, you don't, you know this, you don't always hear back. So
Mhm.
you give, and every time I hear kind words like that, it really motivates me. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I can relate to that feeling because it's uh, I don't know, maybe just to go a little bit back, but to your farm days and to serving in the army, like what maybe what is it that you learned from your childhood and being in the army that you're applying today? Because I think a lot of stuff stays with us. A lot of stuff also fades away. But
Right.
in what ways did it, shape you growing up in Pennsylvania and, as an 18-year-old boy going and enlisting?
I think it's The Rock, right? Dwayne
Mhm.
Johnson talks about, um, and here I am quoting The Rock on your podcast, so I apologize. But he talks about hard work.
Yeah.
He outworks people, and
Mhm.
that's not. It's I grew up, so hard work is how I attack things. I am not the smartest coach in the planet. I was not the smartest student in college, um, but I tried to outwork everyone. So
Mhm.
the work ethic, and I actually think that work ethic, I see it. I try to inspire that in agile teams. I try to
Mhm.
personalize that. I try to lead by example with that. If anything, I'm trying to bring more balance into the work, so I don't overwork. But I think
Mhm.
from growing up on a farm, it was that. I think in
Mhm.
the military, I think discipline, and these sound a little odd in agile context, right? What am I bringing up?
Mhm.
Hard work and discipline, and
Discipline.
you would think more balance, but I think that personal discipline. For example, I journal I was just I do a lean coffee, something called the Moose Herd, twice a week,
Mhm.
and we were just talking about how to develop as a leader. One of the people who attended was talking about that, and I brought up journaling, like
Mhm.
as a daily activity, and I think the discipline I bring to doing that, or even
Yeah.
writing. I don't know. The reason I started writing, and my joke is, I my first book I published in 2004. I started writing it around 2000, and the reason I started writing is because I sucked at business writing. And I mean,
Uh,
I was terrible. I read my stuff. I mean, I would hand it to a CEO, and I was
yeah.
lucky they didn't fire me on the spot for
Yeah.
for for ripping up the English language. Uh, and so part of me is always, if I have a weakness or something, I want to sort of attack it, even if
Mhm.
it's, doggedly attack it with discipline and hard work. So I started writing. I still to this day do not think and I know I'm not the best writer, but if you look at my original, I've improved so much in 20
Mhm.
years. So I'm proud of how I've improved. But that gives you an indication of, I think those principles have really helped me in how I've evolved as like
Mhm.
baseline principles.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, and I can relate to a lot of that in a sense that I also grew up on a farm. I didn't enlist. I wasn't uh, I was in a war, but as a kid, being part of a civil war,
Wow.
and when you say discipline, and hard work, I think those are part of agile, right? Like in the context of that, we want to be disciplined about what we're going to do, and agree. I think discipline is also about commitment, and which is one of the values and I think from a hard work. I mean, like if you don't like what you're doing, you're not gonna put in hard work. So it's resonating with me. Something that's related to this that you recently wrote about is that people wait too long to ask for help. And that's something that we see. Could you maybe elaborate on that? Like what got you thinking about that? Because it's right in front of us. People are waiting, our clients are waiting. But could you
Sure,
maybe
sure. I mean,
share?
I see it. I mean, and I'm sure you've seen this as well as a consultant and as a coach. But I can't tell you how many times, someone will pull me in, and you're assessing a situation, or you're getting to know the situation, and I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, you waited till the last. I mean, you have it. It's like a thermonuclear explosion has gone off, and if you could have just caught it, if you could have just raised your hand and said, I don't know, or get some help, it would have made your life so much easier. This is what I'm thinking. I'm not necessarily sharing this with a client, but I've seen a pattern, and it's not just with clients. I've seen it with coaches, Milan, as well. That coaches are out there. I think it's hard for people to show vulnerability and to say, I don't know. And it's, we talk about, oh, is it safe? Well, even in our Agile community, there's safety amongst coaches. I don't always, I see coaches who are struggling all the time, and but they're not asking for help. Maybe self-awareness is part of it. Maybe humility, hubris. I don't know, but I think there's a general phenomenon in the world, at least in the Agile world, where folks wait a little bit longer than they need to, and it would be so much easier on them if they just admitted and looked at it as a strength. So I'm not even complaining about it. It's like look at saying I don't know and asking for help as a strength instead of a weakness. Look at it as a sign of maturity, and not being afraid to do that. And then from a pure business point of view, right? It costs more, depending on when you get engaged. It's going to cost you a lot more if you get me.
And we know this, and you know it, right?
We know it. We know it. So
I mean, how much is it? Yeah. But I feel like, and you make me think of like just how much is it culturally? Because I was actually talking to Kiro Harada from Japan. He's one of the new CSTRs, and he was saying like we're being taught to do retrospectives in kindergarten. So like when, on the teams, like a lot of times we forget what we did, but like we're being taught, it's part of a culture. The Kaizen is part of culture.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of times our culture is shaping us. And, this is like, at least United States, at least in the Balkans where I'm from, people ask always for directions. But here, it's like, oh, don't ask for directions. It's kind of bad things like don't ask for help,
Absolutely. I think it's hierarchical too. I mean, to some degree, like I think there's a general pattern or phenomenon, but I find leaders, as you move up in a hierarchy, it's harder and harder for the very people that I wish they would please just ask for help. It's in their best interest, but it's harder and harder for senior leaders to do that. I spend a lot of time coaching and consulting with senior leaders. And so I think the inspiration for that, and maybe it was a bit of frustration in writing that blog post, is like, please, it's going to cost me money actually, right? But please, cost me money. Ask for help earlier for your benefit.
Why do you think that is? I mean, like I see that same pattern, and it goes back to that vulnerability. It goes back to the courage, and it's like unless the ship is on fire, don't freak out.
I actually think even if the ship was on fire, then there's this. It's like let's look the
until
other
it's
way.
sinking, yeah.
It's sinking until the water is up here, and then it's your hope. I think it's multifaceted. I think safety is a psychological safety, organizational psychological safety is a big factor. I think power and influence structures in organizations are a big factor. I think human nature and your self-awareness and your your ability to to ask for help, your approachability, your vulnerability. I think it's easy to say I'm vulnerable. It's much harder to show that vulnerability for folks. Uh, and I just think all of those factors come into play as to what's going on. So
Yeah.
I don't know what the science is behind it. I know that it's a pattern that I've seen, and I wish we would embrace it. I literally like to celebrate when I've been a leader. I mean, I'll high five people, Milan, like to say I don't know. My friend Josh Anderson and I talk about how leaders can model behavior in context, and we talk about not just saying thank you to someone for showing vulnerability, but jumping out of our chair, flying across the room, and like high fiving them and saying, you don't know, cool, right? You failed. Give me give me a hug here. Come on over. Right? What do we have a juicy failure that we can sort of learn from. And literally I think so. It's not even just it's sort of asking for help, but realizing as leaders we're setting the tone. Another part of it is like how we show up is modeling what's available in our culture, in our ecosystem. So I'm not joking. It's sort of exaggerating to set the tone, to give permission. So I think it's a bigger thing than just about me or just about the consulting. It's the culture that we're modeling as a leader or as someone in a culture, as any person in a culture.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess something that's related to this and is that critical feedback. And it's so hard. A lot of time, I remember I was teaching a class recently, a Cal class, and I was saying like how I sucked at getting feedback. I wanted feedback, so I knew the feedback was helpful, but then getting feedback, I was raging inside with the feedback that I was getting. So it went back to my emotional intelligence. It went back to like, hey, how do I look at this feedback, as a information that I need to process and then decide, right? It's a perspective. But why do you think it's so hard for many to get critical feedback?
I think so. I don't know. I mean, one reaction I have to the question is I think it's easier to and you see this in Radical Candor. If you read Radical Candor, and Kim has blogged on when she wrote the book initially, it was almost like the floodgates opened up and everyone was giving Radical Candor, and she's like, time out. It's also about receiving it, right?
It goes two ways.
And she said, actually, the first step should be, can you receive Radical Candor before you give it? And it's like, oh, really? I have to do that? But I'm really good at giving it. So I think there's that phenomenon of, like, it's almost, so if you want to be a good leader, be a good follower. If you want to be sort of a good feedback receiver or a good giver, be a good receiver and model that behavior. So how do you react if I come to you, Milan, and I say that Cal class sucked? I'm just kidding, but right? or do you get defensive? Do you start looking for data? I call it death by 1,000 questions, right? You start exploring, right? You start asking 1,000 questions. Yeah. But I'm just trying to get the data, Bob. No, you're not. You don't like what you heard, so you're looking for another answer. I think sort of the way the system is set up is part of that. I think again, maybe there's a common thread here of how we show up, how we receive it, how do we respond to feedback. Then says if we can take it and do something with it, then it makes it easier, or I don't know if we've earned the right to give it, and then people will receive it as well. So I look at it as like a system. It's an ecosystem, and how are both sides of a feedback loops handling that dynamic, right? And I don't think we're good at that, right? I think safety comes as a part of that, psychological safety, power dynamics are part of that. There's a lot of factors. The other thing is I think it's just, you ever hear that feedback is the breakfast of champions that quote,
Yeah.
and look at it as a gift. I think one of the first shifts I talk about a lot about giving and receiving feedback in my Cal class. So I don't know if you do, but I spend,
Mhm.
and we actually practice. So we do some scenarios to practice giving feedback. That's another thing. I don't think folks have the skill and the comfort in how to have, like, we practice crucial conversations, if you will,
Mhm.
in a dojo format,
Mhm.
and really practice it. I find in a short period of time, people really understand that you need some skill, you need some tools, you need some approaches and strategies in that. And it's not just saying, but it's also listening, like powerful listening, and
Mhm.
how are you interacting in the system?
And it's empathizing, right? So like you have to be able to empathize, you have to be able to control your emotions. And somebody might say something that, especially when you're receiving feedback, but it could also be when you're giving. Maybe somebody might tell you to go, you know what? So it goes both ways. And I think something that you mentioned earlier, it's that self-awareness. And it's a broader concept of self-awareness, but if we're aware of how we're providing that critical feedback, and if we're aware of how that other person is receiving it, and then also how we would receive it,
Yeah.
it helps with that. um, so yeah, I mean, and another thing that's tied to this maybe that we can explore, which I really liked, you wrote about the art of personal experiment. And I think when I reflect back on anything that I've done, I've always tried to, and maybe that's my personality, just dive into it. Even with this podcast, I'm like, I don't know anything about podcasting, I don't know anything about video editing, but I'm just going to jump into it. It's something that I want, something that, yeah, maybe might be intimidating at the beginning, but I'm just going to dive into it because, um, in a sense, this is what I feel is, so you talked about having a little bit more structure to personal experiments in your recent blog. Could you maybe share with the audience, like, the art of personal experiment and what you shared in that blog?
I mean, we can talk about it. I think there's a
Yeah.
meta. I think there's something above that. I don't even know if I said it in the blog, but
Yeah.
there's a pattern that I've seen where, as coaches, I'm going to pick on coaches, I'm going to pick on myself, and I'll pick on you.
Yeah.
Uh, I think we are very comfortable telling, but not doing ourselves. So whip is a common thing, right? It's incredibly common for me as a coach to point out excessive whip in all the contexts, in classes, in coaching and consulting. But then when I look at my own personal whip management, my role modeling, my walking my talk,
Mm-hmm.
I throw it out the window, right?
Yeah.
And then experimentation is the same thing, right? We talk about lean agile, lean coffees, discovery, product evolution, innovation, the art of experimentation. We'll say that 1,000 times, but then when I look at myself, it's like, am I challenging myself to experiment? Which you
Mm-hmm.
said, well, what is an experiment? It's something that's ambiguous. It's something that's unknown. I don't know if I can do it. It's taking a risk. When you
Mm-hmm.
did this podcast, I mean, it's walking our talk. Is part of
Yeah.
it. So I'm really bullish lately. Self care is something that I'm equally bullish about. We all talk a
Mm-hmm.
good game, self-servant leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
Self-care. Then when you look at, there's these exhausted coaches who are scheduling 22, Scrum Master class certification classes in a month. I'm kidding,
Mhm.
right?
No,
And
but you're right. I know you're joking, but you're also right. And I've been uh, down that road too, and then pulled back in a
it,
sense of, like you said, it's um,
it's are we walking our talk? So that's what I was
mhm.
trying to get at with the art of experiment, and it's sort of, have we gotten a little bit lazy in some area? and
Mhm.
and it's not just walking our talk, but it's the epiphanies we can have. Like self-care for me, if I invest in self-care, I what I found is I'm a better coach, right? If I'm not exhausted, I have better observation. I have better questions. I have better, sort of suggestions. I can show up and not take a nap in the middle of the day. So I'm showing up better. Experimentation, I try new things. Now, I think I'm like you. I'm a natural experimenter. One of the things I don't know on the farm, it goes back to the farm. So I was very curious as a child, Miljan. So one of the experiments I ran as a child was a tractor. What would be the angle of a tractor before it would tip over? My father didn't really appreciate this experiment, but we had some very hilly land. And I'm like, if I drive it, and at what point does it start getting unstable? And then at what point, well, I didn't want it to flop over, but I wanted to get it to that tipping point, literally, right? And it tipped over, and it almost killed me. Or I was on a farm, we had a dairy farm, and we had compressors everywhere. And if you've ever seen like air compressors and things, and it had a motor and two pulleys with a belt that was moving back and forth. And I remember I was like 6 years old, 7 years old, and I'm like, I wonder if my hand can stop that belt. And the answer is, Miljan, guess what? No. And my arm is going, and my brother is pulling me out of the air compressor. So, or electric fences. We had a lot of electric fences. Yes. How does it react in the rain? I found out that it reacted.
So maybe a little more safely designed experiments.
Exactly. But the learning that goes on with the experiments, the failures. I think there's a lot of interrelatedness in what we're talking about, right? Like it's the discovery. What may be successful? What may be a failure? What's the learning? How do I discover the learning in that? So that's what I was talking about. Now I have a natural tendency to be curious. The writing, the podcasts. If you look at the things that I've done, I'll do things that are in the beginning are very uncomfortable for me. They're out of my comfort zone is another part of it. So driving myself from comfort zone to out of comfort zone. And I think it makes me better.
Yeah, and this made me think of like I was going through and like I think I even listened to a couple of podcasts, from a little while ago, and something that's tied back to this, which you're also pretty vocal about, is diversity and equality. And I think we all tend to talk about diversity and equality, but it goes back to the experiment. What are you doing about it? And I think either in one of the articles or you said how your daughter challenged you to think about diversity, equality, and what you're really doing about it. Bob and Miljan could say, "Oh yeah, I support Black Lives Matter. I support, or support. Well, what's the right way to say it? I disapprove, Asian hate, whatever it is, right? But like, what am I doing about it? How am I helping and creating awareness? And I think you talked about using your platform to do something about it rather than so. Is that also where we can experiment and
we're doing it. Josh and I are doing it. We don't know, but we're leaning into action. The story I told is my daughter and I were teaching a Cal class. I've co-taught Cal classes with my daughter and with other people. I like to pair nowadays, so that's another experiment that I try. I try incredibly hard to pair with people and to pair with diversity, folks from diverse backgrounds. But we were teaching, and I was whining in the class. First day, we got there early. This was an in-person class, and I was whining about the lack of diversity in the class. And she's like, "Well, what did you do?" And I'm like, "I sent an email. I marketed it." And she's like, "What else did you do?" I'm like, "I sent another email. I sent a follow-up email." And she's like, "Okay, what else did you do?" And I'm like, "Well, that was it." And then it's really hard, Miljan, when your kids get on your case. So initially the feedback, I did not handle this feedback very well initially. I got very defensive, and I was.
You start asking questions, right?
No.
No.
And she was like, "Dad, you need to." So the same old actions that you've taken will not get you. So if you're talking about diversity, those same actions will not get you what you're talking won't do it. And she just riffed off you'll have to reach out to people individually. You may have to give discounts. You may have to work through impediments. You may have to ask someone to ask someone to ask someone. You have to work differently if you want a diverse audience, if you want diverse attendees. And I didn't immediately agree with her. I was like, I disagree, right? It's like, I've done everything I could. And then a few days later, I was mulling on it, and I understood. It's the support. And that was the trigger for me from realizing I was fully in support of Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, and all of that. I was talking about it, but I wasn't doing enough about it. And then Josh and I'm trying my best to become a doer, to take action, and to inspire others, to use our platform to hopefully inspire others to take action. And it doesn't have to be big action, just what to do. There's a young lady in Dallas, Anu Gopal is the coach in the Dallas area, and I've established.
Yeah, I know. I'm actually interviewing her this Friday. So
okay,
yeah.
She's helped me make inroads into Agilist. So I've given a special discount, and she's recommended my cow class. So Anu has probably connected me to 30 or 40 individuals as part of my Black Lives Matter diversity and inclusion efforts on that side. And so establishing that kind of connection, and she's really helped me reach into, and that's the kind of action I think we have to take.
Well, that's in like I give crap a little bit to Scrum Alliance for that too, and I'm going to ask Anu how she feels about it. But a lot of times we're all it's easier to just to say, yeah, I support it, but to go extra step like you're saying and actually is harder. But that's what's going to make impact, and it's going to be easier if we all do a little bit of that rather than just and if you look at our community, look at the diversity, look at the and I'm specifically talking about Agile community, Scrum Alliance too. I mean, but I don't think Scrum Alliance is much different than any other Agile community. There is not a lot of diversity. There's mostly middle-aged men now that are getting maybe to your age than ours, but that's
true.
Yeah.
I try to shine a light on this stuff sometimes too. I've written some things that maybe slightly embarrass Scrum Alliance and other organizations. So I counted. I had some free time one Saturday, and I went into the Scrum Alliance site and I counted. I looked at CTCs and CECs, and I counted. I looked at diversity facts, men versus women, and I think I found in the general population there was like 17% or 20% coaches were women, and it disappointed me immensely. Or whatever the numbers, I could go back to the blog post and I can send you a link to it.
I think I read it.
I copied folks on it, and I'm not trying to blame. I'm just trying to shine a light on in our community. That's not good enough. From my point, that's just simply not good enough. We can do better than that.
Well, exactly. And to give you an example too, like, when I started the blog post, not blog post, the podcast, it rose out of like, who would I like to have a beer with? So that was assumption. And it was mostly the people that I was thinking is guys, like, who would I want to sit down, either that I have, that I haven't. And then as I started doing, I realized, like, look at my first 20 interviews, right? It was pretty much white guys, right?
Yep.
And I'm like, well, this is interesting because first of all, a lot of these people were part of the Agile community. They were the experts, so there's not much diversity to pick from. And I just don't want to always force it and say, I need to get this person or this person because they're, they'll add to my diversity. I still want to keep the bar high in a sense of like who I want to bring on the podcast, but do extra homework and discover people that I do want to talk to that will add diversity to this. So it makes my job a little bit harder and forces me to do more homework, but I think it's adding richness to the podcast and what people have to say. So
I'd say we have I can't project onto you, Milan, but I think we have a
Mhm.
responsibility to use our platforms or to the degree that we can. The
Mhm.
disappointment I have with the Scrum Alliance directly, Agile Alliance a little bit less, but still, is there's these wonderful platforms. It's like, what are you doing?
Mhm.
You have this wonderful community, and I know they're doing some things, but there's so much more that they could do.
Yeah.
And to your point, if we could inspire every individual to do what they can, you're doing something. Um, what Anthony Mercino is a coach in Chicago, and
Mhm.
he's done some podcasts where he spotlights folks. He gives diverse voices
Mhm.
a unique opportunity to either present or to do something. People who haven't had a voice, who haven't had a stage, and I just
Mhm.
admire what he's doing there. Not a lot. He's maybe had 5 or 6 or 7 folks on. He reached out to me and he asked me for a list of up and comers.
Yeah.
Diversity inclusion, do you have any up and coming voices that I could invite? And I sent him a list and he invited a few folks on and
Mhm.
just sort of keeping the ball rolling. And then some of those folks I know then submitted to conferences or are
Exactly.
writing, and they're role models when they're at a conference. They're a role model for other people, so it unfolds. It creates momentum.
Well, that too, and something else that you just said that reminded me is like, coming when I came to United States, I didn't know English. The culture was, I was 13 years old, and as I went through pretty much, seventh grade, eighth grade, uh, when I went to high school, there are certain things that, first of all, from like I felt racism. I felt excluded because I didn't speak English, or so. Like I felt probably too minimal to what some people experience, but I it was an experience that I can relate to. The other thing is that I think we don't a lot of times know, which I know now, is there are people outside of the agile or mainstream that would add so much value to the broader community. It's just that they're never exposed to it. Like
Right.
there are some people that just, so we can take an extra step to pull those people in and
Yep.
get them involved in agile, get them involved whatever you're doing, in order to give them a chance to learn about this stuff, because there are certain people, and maybe this goes back to privileges or whatever it is, that are naturally exposed to certain things, and some people that are almost not prohibited, but it's not easy for them to say like, hey, I could be a great scrum master if I knew what great scrum master is, or
Abs-
how I get uh, to that, on that path or on that
I,
journey.
I agree. One of the areas that I have a strong affinity, and I've shared it with the Scrum Alliance back, I think Manny was the CEO or something, so this is a few years ago, but veterans. So because I was in the Army, I have a strong affinity and respect and support for folks who defend our country. It's just me. And I don't think the government does enough when those
You're
folks come
breaking
back.
up. I don't know if it's on my end. Do you see it?
I can hear you. Can you hear me okay? How am I doing now?
I can't hear you now. Let's see.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How am I doing now?
Um,
How am I doing now?
okay. Now it's good. I think it might be on my end.
but, uh, but veterans. And so
Yeah.
that's a community of helping other veterans who are coming back and leaving service. And what can we do to help them if they want to map from military service to Scrum, to Agile?
Mhm.
And again, it's what can, I think there's an advocacy aspect. I don't think the Scrum, boy, it sounds like I'm picking on them. I'm not, but I think the Scrum Alliance could do so much more there. I think the Agile Alliance could do so much more there of being
Mhm.
advocates to broaden our, I sound like a politician, to broaden our,
Yeah.
broaden our tent. I agree with you.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's something that I guess just thinking more about, and thinking, in the sense of what could I do to not just talk and verbally support, but more support with my actions.
Absolutely.
I wanted to come back to another thing that you wrote, which I also found interesting. A metaphor that you used for coaching stances of mirrors and windows. And I think a lot of times as coaches, Scrum Masters, we struggle with, when to tell people what to do, or maybe give them some insights, and when to get them to figure things out, so really coaching versus consulting or mentoring. How did you, I think you mentioned that you had some kind of, you guys were doing one of your moose herds or one of your lean coffee type of things. And could you share what happened there and how you came up with that metaphor?
You know what? To be honest, I forget. I forget the metaphor. I think the message. I forget the driver.
Yeah.
I think the message though is there's a lot of singular stance focus. I don't know what you see in the coaching community, but what I see through my lens and my network is that somewhere along the line over the years, we've really we've promoted the coaching stance to be the predominant stance. And the coaching stance is, as you know, is a non-prescriptive, holding the client as all-knowing, all-seeing, powerful questions. And there's nothing wrong with the coaching stance. It's an incredibly valid stance. But that's a lot of Agile coaches, and I think the certifications actually emphasize coaching stance over other stances. And I keep trying, I'm on a soapbox trying to say it's not the only stance. And that there are some situations, Miljan, I don't know about you, but the leaders that I typically am coaching, if I took 100% coaching stance into them,
you'll be out.
They'd kick me out the window. And I'm not exaggerating.
No, it actually happened to me where I was coaching a team. It was a government agency actually, and a manager comes to me and says, "Miljan, you're not helping out. The team is complaining. They're saying, you're just asking questions and not telling them what to do, and they really don't see the value, and they don't." They don't think they need your help.
Exactly. Exactly. So what I'm really trying to do, I have a platform, and sometimes, remember I said I was trying to help the community. Sometimes helping the community is being that thorn in the side that keeps saying something, or maybe raising something up that no one wants to talk about. So I'm trying to maybe make the case that I'm not anti-coaching stance. I'm pro-balance stances.
Well, exactly. And I think it's almost like it's in that instance where they were absolutely right. They didn't want to be coached. And I think one of the issues that we have as coaches, we're not clear about coaching agreements and what does it mean to be an Agile coach, right? If they really are looking for the answers, they're hiring me to do that. So meet them where they are. So typically in that situation now, I would say, okay, I might mentor them. Then I might teach them and say, hey, Bob, can you come over here or even ask for the permission? Do you mind if I share something on a whiteboard and start teaching them? And then through that process, I might start asking a question and more of a coaching. So it's balancing that, like you said, it's more.
Exactly. I'm working on a coaching book now. I'm writing a coaching book, and I have the first draft. I just got editor feedback, which now I'm sort of slogging through all of this wonderful feedback. But I talk about a coaching arc. So one metaphor in it is having a coaching arc. And I talk about, in the situations that we've written about, it's switching stances. So how do you enter the arc? How do you navigate some things? How do you land the arc? Situational awareness, sensing. If you're familiar with Kinevin, sort of sense and respond. I think that notion of sensing and responding as a coach to the client, I think that's our responsibility.
It is. And I mean, this is a topic that I would love to talk to you more about, but like, that is actually sensing, and Canavan is just one of the sense making tools, right? So when
Yeah.
I go into like, I'm also sensing what Bob's values are if I'm coaching you one-on-one. So
Exactly.
I need to understand your perspectives, your worldviews, so I understand kind of what's motivating you, what do you believe is true, and then I can adjust my approach to that too. So.
Absolutely. Now, that being said, I don't know if there are a lot of coaches in the world that can do that, Milan. I, I I think that's a challenge. That would be extraordinary coaching. There's a lot more staying in this it's easier to stay in a singular stance than it is to have all of this this nuanced awareness that you and I are talking about.
Well, I think I call it like the next wave of coaching. I'm actually talking to Michael Spade, who you probably know and who's contributed a lot to this agile coaching space, along with Lisa and others. But I think the next 5 years will be about what you're describing, and probably your book is going to be one of the resources that we can use to help people truly understand what we're talking about here. And I think it's bringing psychology in, it's bringing more of systems thinking, and I'm using other frameworks that will help us be better coaches, better agile coaches, I guess, which is a broader umbrella than just professional coaches.
Absolutely. I think it's the other thing is even in the book, I've anchored the book. There's something called the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel, which is a model that was developed out of some work in the UK, some Scrum Alliance retreats, coaching retreats created. And I like the model. It's a little bit more nuanced than the X-Wing model. But in the book, I have a chapter on what are some missing stances. And I talk about like leadership being potentially a missing stance. Of literally are we a leader? And do we need to step into leadership at times, as scary as that might sound, or championing stance, where we're literally, we're sort of championing our team, rallying cry, providing momentum, providing positive energy. That might be a stance, a minor stance, but a stance that we need to adopt occasionally. So I'm interested in sort of stance variations. I'm not trying to create 1,000 stances, but I think as coaches, it's not just 4 things. Oh, you train, you mentor, you facilitate, you coach, and you buy everyone donuts or whatever,
or sushi,
or sushi, or whatever. Right? There's nuance to it. A change agency or being a change artist is something that I think of. Right? Very often, you and I mean, we're the embodiment of change. We're navigating. We're in a river trying to change. We're in a river of change, and we're trying to navigate that ourselves. So having some change models and being aware of some change artistry techniques might be useful. It's not just coaching stance. I think of agile coaching as being incredibly rich, incredibly deep, incredibly broad, not scary, and something that I can keep learning for my lifetime. It's a really rich landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I've written a little bit about this, but I use the analogy of cooks and chefs. And like, if you look at culinary discipline, right, it's so broad and it can be so creative and encompasses so many other disciplines outside of just culinary. And I think agile coaches are like, on that spectrum from cooks to chefs, and we need all of those. But if you really want to be a good agile coach, you're like a really good chef, maybe James Beard Award type of chef, maybe not, but you understand a lot of different things, and like you can put together good dishes from what you have. Right?
I love that metaphor. I love that, but it takes passion and perseverance. There's a lot of learning in that. Right. I mean, those chefs know how they can go out and talk to farmers. They can get, right. They can get locally sourced. I mean, they're very adept.
They grow
And
other people, right? In the sense, like, they'll take somebody as an apprentice and
yep,
help them, develop into, and with their own unique style. They're not going to say you have to, So I see a lot, a lot of resemblance, and metaphors is, they can only go so far,
right.
but those are some of the things that, at least in my head, are going through. Maybe as we're wrapping up here, and I can't believe it's already been an hour, but um, what would be your message? You're doing a lot of, or at least you've been doing Cal classes for, I don't know, since I think 2017. You were one of the first ones to start teaching those. What would be your message to aspiring leaders, Scrum Masters, Agile coaches? What are some of the key messages from your class that you share or that you think would be helpful to share here?
I think we've sort of touched on them. It's
Mhm.
ask for help. I think it's, so we talk, walk your talk, show vulnerability, go to a Cal class, reach out to me. I mean, I do, freebies, or so learn. Leadership
Mhm.
is a craft. Uh, don't be, acknowledge that you know things and that you don't. You and I were talking, we were just talking about it from a coaching perspective. Find a mentor, find a coach, go to some classes, look at yourself as you're continuously learning. Make sure that you're passionate about what you do. Not just, it's not just about getting funds. I do what I do. Yes, I drive revenue. Yes, I get paid.
Mhm.
I do what I do because I love what I do. I'll never retire because I love what I do. This is this is this is the best thing since sliced bread for me. But find that baseline things. If it's not like that for you, it, then maybe find where your passion is. One thing, if you're coaching leaders, empathy. We didn't talk about it much, but connect. Walk in people's shoes uh, before you coach them.
Mhm.
I wish more coaches, I wish all coaches would walk in the shoes of their clients before they open their mouth. I know
Mhm.
that sounds odd, but do that, and do it in both directions. So mentor someone and be mentored, coach
Mhm.
someone and be coached. Right. I think that balance of continuous learning would, whether you're a leader, a coach, a scrum master, will really help you. So, sort of what I'm circling is the topics we've talked about. Really embody, find what you love, embody, discover that, right. Have the humility to say, I know very little of this,
Mhm.
and then every day learn something. Every day reach out to someone. Every day help someone and be helped. And become, what was our metaphor? The chef, that James Beard master chef, that doesn't know everything,
Mhm.
is not expert in every culinary school, but
Exactly.
has grassroots, so lots of tools, is continuously learning and trying things. Even the experimentation that we talked about, Milan,
Mhm.
dovetails into that metaphor. Experimenting with new dishes,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Right. Experiment, and some of
And
them
not
are
being afraid, and
and not being
just
afraid.
yeah.
So I don't know. I think along this talk, there's some things that I think would be useful for folks as
Yeah.
guiding principles.